The world outside was a swirling vortex of white. Snow, driven by a merciless wind, erased every landmark, every path, every sign of life. It was a blank, cold canvas of despair. And into this canvas, an old man named Arthur walked, completely unaware. He wore only a thin cardigan over his pajamas, his feet protected by nothing more than worn-out slippers. His mind, once a library of memories and wisdom, was now a confusing labyrinth, ravaged by Alzheimer's. He didn't know he was cold. He didn't know he was lost. He was just walking, following a ghost of a memory that promised him home was just around the corner. Back at the house, the door swung gently in the wind, a gaping mouth screaming into the empty kitchen. On the floor, a bowl of milk sat untouched, but the house wasn't entirely empty. In the armchair where Arthur usually sat, a ginger cat named Marmalade was stirring. He was old, just like Arthur. His movements were stiff, his ears a little tattered from a life well lived. For years, his entire world had been the warmth of Arthur's lap, the gentle rhythm of his breathing as they napped together, the soft rumble of his voice. But now, the rhythm was gone. The warmth was gone. The house felt hollow, and a primal fear, cold and sharp as the wind outside, pierced through the cat's sleepy haze. He didn't meow or cry. He simply jumped down from the chair, his old bones protesting. He padded to the open door and stared out into the blizzard. The wind flattened his fur and stung his eyes, but he didn't flinch. A scent, faint but familiar, called to him through the chaos, the scent of his human, his friend, his entire world. And he knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that Arthur was in terrible danger. However, what could a small old cat do against a storm like this? He was not a search dog. He was not a hero. He was just Marmalade. But in that moment, none of that mattered. He took a hesitant step out into the snow, his paws sinking into the freezing powder. Then another and another. He lowered his body, his belly scraping the icy ground, and followed the ghost of a scent, a lifeline in the white nothingness. The world was a painful blur of cold. Every step was agony. Ice crystals clung to his whiskers, and the wind howled like a predator. He was small and insignificant, a tiny speck of orange against an endless roaring white. More than once he stumbled, his old legs giving out. But then he would remember the warmth of Arthur's lap, the gentle hand that had fed him for 15 years, and a fire would ignite in his small chest. He pushed on, driven by a love so pure and powerful, it defied the storm itself. Hours seemed to pass. He was near his limit, his body trembling uncontrollably. He was about to collapse, to surrender to the cold. But then, he saw it. A dark shape, almost completely buried in a snowdrift 100 yards from the house. It was Arthur. He had finally fallen, the last of his energy gone. He was lying still, a dusting of white already covering him like a shroud. Death was circling, patient and cold. Marmalade used the last of his strength to scramble through the deep snow. He reached Arthur and nudged his icy hand with his head, but there was no response. He let out a desperate, rattling meow, a sound swallowed by the wind. Panic seized him. He couldn't pull him, he couldn't wake him, but he could share his warmth. With a final, determined effort, he climbed onto Arthur's chest. He curled himself into the tightest possible ball, right over his heart. He ignored the biting cold that seeped through his own fur. He focused all his energy, all his life force, into a single purpose: to be a living, breathing furnace for the man he loved. He tucked his head down and began to purr. It was a weak, shuddering purr at first, but it grew stronger, a rumbling engine of defiance against the storm. It was a sound of life, of loyalty, of unwavering love. When the search party, alerted by a neighbor who noticed the open door, finally found them, they couldn't believe their eyes. The old man was unconscious, his body temperature dangerously low, but he was alive. And on his chest, like a furry orange guardian angel, lay a cat, also covered in snow, trembling but still purring, still fighting. They carefully lifted Marmalade off. The cat was so cold he could barely move, but his eyes never left Arthur's face as the paramedics worked. At the hospital, the doctors were stunned. "Another 20 minutes and he would have been gone," one of them said, looking at the small cat now wrapped in a warm towel. "That cat's body heat, concentrated over his heart, is the only reason he's alive. It kept his core temperature just high enough to survive." Arthur eventually recovered, his memory of the event a complete blank. But when he was back in his armchair and Marmalade was placed on his lap, something shifted. He looked down at the ginger cat, and his hand, frail and wrinkled, began to stroke him. "There you are," Arthur whispered, a glimmer of recognition in his eyes. "You stayed with me." Marmalade just purred, a deep, contented rumble. He was home. Sometimes, the greatest acts of heroism don't come from a place of strength or power, but from a love so profound it refuses to let go, even in the face of the most impossible storm.